called the Human Rights Council. And the Human Rights Council is a subsidiary of the United Nations General Assembly. So in March 2006, a resolution was passed by the United Nations General Assembly to establish a Human Rights Council whose mandate was to carry on what we call the Universal Periodic Review. So the Universal Periodic Review is a mandate under the Human Rights Council. That's a 47-member state organization under the United Nations Charter. It's called a charter-based mechanism because it's derived from the United Nations Charter. And basically, what does the UPR mean? It means the review of peer states. One country reviewing the other country's human rights situation in terms of how have you fulfilled your human rights obligations and pledges. So it's a mechanism where states peer review each other within the United Nations.
Okay.
And all the 192 states, member states of the United, go through this cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. Looks at how has country A been able to fulfill its human rights obligations under the so many international human rights instruments that it has ratified. So you are sort of monitoring how country A is fulfilling its human rights obligation. And so every country goes through that cycle.
When do the reviews happen?
The reviews happen every 4 years.
Okay.
And for the case of our own country, Uganda, we last had a review in 2016, and now we are going for another one after 4 years in January 2022.
Does every country choose when to do theirs, or it's also a universal pattern of doing it?
No, the council sets up the cycle every year. So there are countries that go throughout the period which a country A is reviewed may be different from what the other countries.
Okay,
yeah.
So when one country is being reviewed, it's only that one country that is being reviewed,
no,
or there are quite a number of those?
There are quite a number of other countries. For example, Zimbabwe will also be reviewed at the same time Uganda is reviewed.
Okay.
So you find in a particular cycle there are a certain number of countries that will be reviewed within that cycle. Yeah.
Okay, let's come to you, Chen, Susan, you're from UONET. First of all, from the gender perspective, from the women perspective, how is this first and foremost, and how does it add on to the activism and, of course, the advancement of the women's rights in this country? Thank you,
Jagenda. Now, the peer review process is very important because it keeps us accountable. As a country, it keeps us accountable as individual organizations, it keeps us accountable as institutions that are mandated to promote rights, to protect rights. Uganda is a party to a number of international, regional, and conventions on human rights, but also on women's rights in particular. So this peer review process helps us to measure whether we are achieving against those international conventions. It helps us to check ourselves because recommendations are made at each review. And as a country, we come back to see that we can move towards those recommendations and achieve them. Yeah, so it's...
how many times has Uganda been reviewed? Once or twice?
Twice. We are going for the third cycle.
It's going to be the third cycle.
Yeah.
Cheng, still, Susan, with you. From the two reviews, what do you look at as the recommendation in there that you appreciated that have also helped to make things better? Because I think for every review, you look at possibly what did not work right and try to make it right. From the two reviews, where would you actually pitch us as a country?
One of the recommendations that came out in the last review was increasing of health sector budgets. And indeed, from 2016, the financial year 2016, all the way to 2019, the health sector budgets rose from 5.3 to about 6.6. But in this financial year, we see that the budget has dropped again. Now, these are some of these recommendations do push government to think about how they are allocating resources for certain things. One of the other recommendations that were coming out were around gender responsive laws and policies that actually work for women. You know, some of our laws tend to be gender blind. They fail to realize that women and men, boys and girls, access rights differently. So in the last 4 years, we've seen a number of progressive policies. For example, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education and Sports during this period developed a policy on a strategy for girls' education, and it provides for it makes provisions for girls for things around menstrual hygiene. It makes provisions for recruitment of female teachers, because those are the things which are going to have an impact on girls actually staying in school. We've also seen in this same period bills that have been passed into law. Some of them have not yet been assented to by the president for reasons, for a number of reasons. For example, the succession amendment bill was passed. We also have the employment amendment bill. We also have the sexual offences bill. These are very important because the provisions, some of the provisions therein directly impact on women. Let me give you an example. The employment amendment bill has provisions that are provisions around that are directly related to women's maternal functions, to be able to have breastfeeding corners for women at workplaces. That is important for the productivity of any employee. Yes, it is in the law. The employment amendment, during this process of a review of the employment amendment bill, there are also provisions for the rights of casual workers. Casual workers in Uganda are predominantly women, you know. So some of these provisions that have been passed into law with reservation are very important, and these are recommendations that still came out from the review. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Let me get to Mr. Samuel Insubuga of the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. To start with, what does now the Africa Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims pick from the earlier two reviews that we are talking about before we even get to the third review?
Thank you very much, Mr. Jagenda. In the first two reviews, we actually had significant achievements in the fight against torture. In the one of 2011 is when we recommended to have the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, or the anti-torture law, to be passed, and with the advocacy made with the various states, it helped us to have it passed in 2012. So we can say that was an extremely significant achievement, because there was no legal framework against torture before then, and people would be charged for grievous bodily harm or assault and not get the due punishment they deserve. But now with the anti-torture law passed in 2012, that was a significant achievement, and we believe the Universal Periodic Review that time, that cycle really helped in that one. Then the second review, which was in 2016, we had the the second review was actually the issues of trying to make sure that that this law is implemented. We have had challenges in the implementation of this law, so we had also we recommended for the what they call the optional protocol, the Convention Against Torture, which unfortunately was not taken up. So that is something which we hope in this cycle, in addition to having the Witness Protection Bill passed into law, we hope in this cycle it will be passed.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chirenga, yes, you talked about states. You gave us a good background of how we got to UPR and what it is, and states seem to be very pivotal in ensuring that this circle happens. Let's tell us more about what states or what governments, in this case our country Uganda, needs to do to honor and to ensure that actually this happens. I want to see the government in there, away from seeing the contribution of the other so many civil society organizations.
Thank you, Mr. Zikusoka. So the UPR is a state-driven process. The driver is the state The rest who come in are accompanying. That is civil society, national human rights institutions, and any other partners. So because it's a state-driven process, it's the country, the government of the Republic of Uganda, that tells the other peers, other states, this is how we've been able to fulfill our human rights obligations, and therefore this is how we've tried to improve the human rights situation back home. And what are these human rights obligations? That we've been trying to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. All from the civil, political, socio-economic, cultural, and the group rights. This is what we've been able to achieve. Then civil society and others have said, well, we appreciate this is what the state has been able to do, but we think they can add more or they can do more. So we do what we call a shadow report, which we submit to the United Nations, and then they compile it, and then they look at it. So it's a state-driven process. What we come in, and the principle here is human rights situation can only improve through cooperation and dialogue. So you are engaging with the state, telling them how best can we help you to ensure that the human rights situation in your country has improved.
Is the government privy to the shadow report, or it just gets it from the United Nations?
Exactly, it is privy, and we are all encouraged, all actors, because it's a state-driven process, that you involve as much as possible all state actors. These are the ministries, department, and agencies. That if you are dealing with issues to do with women's rights, the Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development should be aware of what are you compiling, what is the data, is the data you are giving out reliable data, is it accurate? So you're supposed to involve all of them. Just as the state, when it's compiling its national report, it is required to please involve as much as possible national human rights institution, that's the Uganda Human Rights Commission, involve the Equal Opportunities Commission, involve the civil society organizations that focus on that cluster of women's rights, so that it is all embracing and enriching. Because the objective at the end of the day is to improve the human rights situation.
And how is that multi-sectoral stakeholder engagement between the government and civil society organizations? How is it in as far as sharing information and data is concerned to what will achieve the review that you get to?
Very good question, Mr. Jagena. So we have what we call the Civil Society Consortium on the UPR, which is coordinated by our organization, the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders.
And the organization also coordinating the other human rights defenders?
Exactly. So we bring them together. Our work is basically coordination. We bring all the 20 or so clusters that deal on women's rights, that deal on civil political rights, that deal on group rights, and we bring them together and say, these are the recommendations that the government of Uganda supported and accepted. In your view, have they implemented these recommendations? So Uganda Women's Network will tell us, yes, in as far as women are concerned, on the recommendation to have an increment in the budget in as far as allocation of resources to the health sector, this was done. He will be talking about civil political in terms of torture, the legislative framework, in terms of the laws, policies, and institutions in place. This is what has been done, but we think they can do more. So our work is to coordinate all these organizations and come up with one comprehensive report, what they call the shadow report. And that shadow report is not compiled without the involvement of state actors, because we have an interministerial committee that works with this, headed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, supported by also the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs.
Okay, thank you very much. To you, Mr. Nsubuga, yes. Just getting back to you, what did you pick from the President's speech a few days ago when he came and talked very vehemently about human rights and why torture shouldn't be part of judicial processes?
First of all, it was music to our ears, because we have been doing advocacy against torture, against the beatings he was talking about. So it coming from the commander-in-chief and the head of state, we felt it was something which we really welcomed, and because there are always these issues of orders from above, being told to do this, but we believe now they will listen. They will listen to the head of state, to the commander-in-chief, not to continue this heinous vice of torture. We have been having, civil society has actually been creating awareness and training all these the security agencies against human rights violations, and they actually have even human rights directorates themselves, the police, the UPDF, the prisons. So the human rights has been mainstreamed even in their training as the forces. But still, of course, torture has still been prevalent. But it coming in from him, we hope now that there will be a difference. The only gap which we still see is that the people who have allegedly tortured should be identified so that they are punished, because there is a law, there is the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act, because it will serve as an example that if you torture, this is what you get. You serve time in prison. So that is the gap which we really want the government to take further. Yes.
Okay, still coming back to that, talking about the civil and political rights or liberties in this country, I just want to know where, for example, we just went through an election not so long ago, and the Electoral Commission issued guidelines to actually say we are holding this election in the midst of a pandemic, and this is what we expect from you, the players. And some political players vehemently and audibly and publicly came out to say, we will not do that. I will not do that. Come with 20 people to the nomination center. I will not come with 20. I will come with so many. Please don't convene here. I will convene there. Do what you want to do. Please don't do this. I will not do this. Please come with a COVID report. I will not come with I just want to know where all these civil and political rights, how they feature into all these reviews that we're getting to.
Okay. First of all, it was extremely important to follow the guidelines set by the Minister of Health and the government against the COVID-19 pandemic. And unfortunately, during this period, we had a number of overzealous security agencies, because we got last year as the treatment center. We saw 95 persons who were affected by the security agencies allegedly torturing them, and then around the election season there were 65, all during this COVID-19 pandemic. The issue is that yes, they should be arrested for flouting the guidelines, but they should be taken through the process of the courts of law, because there was a statutory instrument which was put there, and they are punished accordingly. But they should not be mistreated. They should not be handled violently. That was what we found during this COVID-19 pandemic period. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Susan, do you look at this as helping and also beefing and helping the women movement in this country? Because yes, we admit and accept that we cannot develop holistically as a country if we do not put the gender question into perspective. The men, like Ndugu Chirenga here, have had these arguments of saying we again over-pampering and over-empowering the women to their detriment. From your own experience, how would you look at this as advancing the women movement and also helping us to balance the gender equilibrium in the country, in as far as development holistically is concerned?
I would like to start with what you've spoken about, the perception that women have received undue attention in terms of empowerment. That is actually a very diversionary perception. Yes, because statistics show that women continue to hold the shorter end of the stick. They are still disproportionately vulnerable. They do not have access to economic capital. They're the ones who are not given as many opportunities as men. That is the community we live in. There is an idea to male engagement. Male engagement as a strategy is good, because you need to get the male population on your side. You need them as advocates, you need them as change agents. But there is a slightly misleading perception to male engagement that pushes the agenda that men are being sidelined. And that for us is a huge challenge because it waters down the arguments that we make around uplifting women, around protecting women, around achieving gender equity, you know? So that can be a very problematic thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I will come back to you, Mr. Chirenga, but we just want to take a break. And when we come back from the break, we'll continue the conversation here, and we talk about the Universal Periodic Review. And we thank the sponsors and, of course, those who have brought it live to us, the GIZ, and everybody who is making it possible to ensure that this conversation is on this morning. Let's come back after this break.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Periodic Review, UPR, is a unique process under the United Nations. It involves peer review of the human rights records of all UN member states every 4 years. The ultimate aim of the UPR is to help improve on the human rights situation in all countries through technical assistance and cooperation. Uganda will be reviewed in January 2022. This is an opportunity to raise international advocacy on Uganda's human rights situation. The National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda is coordinating all CSOs to participate in the CSO alternative reporting process in liaison with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For more information, email info@hrdcoalition.ug or call 0772 484 504.
The Universal Periodic Review, UPR, is a mechanism under the United Nations where member states review each other's human rights situation every 4 years. It's a voluntary process where all states are treated as equal partners.
The ultimate aim of the UPR is to improve on the human rights situation in all countries through technical assistance and cooperation.
The UPR is a state-driven process, and as such, the preparation of the report is done by an interministerial committee on human rights that is chaired by Foreign Affairs. We value stakeholder input in the process and therefore appreciate the role of civil society in the third cycle of the UPR process.
To this effect, the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda, a civil society organization, is coordinating all civil society organizations to participate in this process of the alternative reporting in liaison with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Uganda.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Welcome back from that short break. We continue the conversation here, talk about the Universal Periodic Review, and sponsored by GIZ. And in the studios this morning, I am with Mr. Chirenga, the Executive Director of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders of Uganda. I am with Mr. Nsubuga Samuel Herbert from the Africa Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, and also Susan Achenia from UNET. Thank you so much. Let me come to you, Mr. Chirenga. Uganda's constitution, chapter Article 17, talks about the rights of citizens, and there's a whole not the rights, yes, the rights of the duties, actually, not the rights, but the duties of a citizen, and there are a number of duties in there. When you read many of Uganda's documents, lately now we talk about the third national development plan. We talk about the Vision 2040. You notice that one thing that comes out very clearly is that Ugandans are disinterested in knowing about things that concern them. We now talk about the UPR. Why do you think it would be important for the citizens to actually know what is happening? Because Ugandans tend to get very disinterested in many of the things that happen. Why do you think it should be important for Ugandans to actually know about this review, periodic review that we talk about?
Thank you, Mr. Jagenda. I think every citizen should really pick interest in this process and tend to know it and try to appreciate it, because it's all about we as citizens. It's talking about the human rights. And there's nothing you can talk about a human being if it's not about human rights. Mention anything, I'll tell you how it's linked to human rights. because human rights is not an abstract subject. It's about the human being. So how you live, how you eat, how you survive, how you engage, how you apply, how you get to being productive is all about human rights. Now, for us to realize human rights in this country can be done at different levels. At a national level, at a regional level, our African Union and the East African Community, and an international level. This UPR brings together all countries, and all countries are treated as equal partners. That the government of Uganda can make recommendations to the United States of America, what you consider the most powerful country, and say, we would like to see the situation of human rights in the United States improved to ensure that blacks are not discriminated, that blacks are achieve equal treatment like any other. So you can make recommendations. Likewise, the government of Uganda receives recommendations. Some it supports. When it says that we support this recommendation, it means we accept and we shall be held liable in terms of implementation. So there are so many recommendations that touch on the well-being of you and me, Mr. Sijagi. So you should pick interest, depending on what you see as critical to you as a priority. So if they are talking about maternal health and you are a woman, and Uganda has accepted the recommendation to do with the increment of the budget allocation to the health sector in terms of addressing maternal health, any woman should pick interest in it and say, is government implementing this? Because maternal health touches on any woman or girl child. So every citizen in this country should. Now, linking what you talked about in Article 17 in terms of the duties of a citizen, for every right that you are entitled to, there is a corresponding duty or obligation. That you cannot talk about rights in isolation of responsibilities or duties. So we have a right to development, but at the same time we have a duty to pay taxes. That is something that people don't want to link to. You can't complain about roads. You can't complain about the lack of drugs.
And you evade taxes.
And you are evading taxes, or you don't want to pay taxes, or you are inciting others. You can't talk about peace and security when you are inciting the public to do wrong things. So for every right, is a corresponding duty and obligation. So the two must be seen as moving together.
Mr. Nsubuga,
yes.
Where is the Mwananchi in the review here? I want to know, when we talk about the things, this country reviewing the other country and stuff like that, we're now discussing on TV, and I'm only thinking there's a jargon in some village they're watching, there's a chirenga in some village they're watching us, and where is the Mwananchi, where is this citizen in the review that we're talking about? What is their contribution? What's their participation? How do they come in?
Civil society has also endeavored to actually also go to the wananchi, omuntu wa bulijjo, as they say, to create awareness. Let me give you the example now about the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act. We do not only create awareness with the security agencies, but we also go to the communities. So that they also know their rights. We also know that if they, as an individual, if they torture, they would also be liable for their actions. So we also create awareness of all these rights, so that they are aware, as Mr. Chirenga said, so that they also know that they also have a responsibility to make sure that they do not harm a neighbor, because they would be infringing on that neighbor's human right. So we in addition to the duty bearers, we also create awareness with the rights holders.
Okay. Why I actually brought in this is I want to see you talked about the torture law, for example.
Yes.
She'll talk about quite a number of these laws. We talk about the Equal Opportunities Commission and what it possibly stands for. But I want to see the one. Do you, for example, when you talk about these torture things, do you go educate them? Do they know that it's not only the police that tortures me, but I can be tortured by another person. I can be tortured by, and I can also torture actually the police, because if the president gets on TV and says stop beating people, stop harassing people, stop backing at people, it doesn't give me a leverage to actually now get to a policeman, because I know he will not beat me. It will also now get him off the hook or balance him. Do you also get into this? Because I think it's important to even remind the one.
Yes, yes. We actually, because actually the security forces at times they say, but you people, your focus is only on us.
Is on us as enforcers.
So they keep reminding us that please also tell the wananchi that because they actually also face torture also. So we remind everybody. We do not discriminate on this creating awareness. We also remind the citizens that torture should not be done at any cost.
Okay. Yeah. To you, Susan, the very vibrant women's the women's movement in this country, I know has made some quite good recommendations to the government. How far and how much has government implemented? How have you tracked them, and how would you commend government into or looking into your recommendations, or demanding for more from possibly what they've not done?
You know, advocating for women's rights is it's an uphill task. There's a lot of what can seem like a give and take. Whereas we see gains being made, we also, on the other hand, see that there are many gaps. There are many missing links that need to be put in place. Let me give you an example. By 2018, according to Ministry of Health, according to the Ministry of Health, 72% of the Ugandan population is living within a 5-kilometer radius to a health facility.
72%.
That would imply that health services are, one, nearer to the people, but that they're actually accessing health services when they go to the facilities. But the remaining, the logistical gaps remain in terms of funding for medical supplies, in terms of the staffing levels for users to find a skilled medical worker. Those are the things that remain in place. You will find we have UPE schools dotted around a parish, dotted around a sub-county, meaning that every child, every girl can actually access basic education. But what is the quality of education that they're coming out with? And then there are the social factors, the gender factors that come in. Girl children are predominantly burdened. I do not want to use the word burdened. The demands on girl children to perform home care tasks, what we call unpaid care and domestic work, are quite high, that they take away from these girl children the time they would spend concentrating on school, they are spending on domestic work. If a housemaid, a nanny is needed in Kampala, they're the first ones to be pulled out. What are the checks to government to ensure that some of these things are not happening? So whereas we are seeing gains, we also see reversals. Sure. We also see that we are actually not progressing. The other example I could give is in terms of leadership. Right now we are at near parity. If I could speak about, not near parity, but we've made strides in terms of representation of women, say in the national parliament.
Political representation.
Political representation. In the last parliament, in the 10th parliament, we're at 35% representation. In this parliament, we are at 33%. There's been a reduction, a drop. But what we want to see is that these women in parliament are active participants. Okay. We want them to increase their influence in parliament. We want them to be able to actually influence women-centered concerns, budgets for women, planning for women, laws and policies that work for women and girls. But are we seeing that? You know? Okay. So in as much as we see these gains, we continue to say that a lot more needs to be done. Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Chirenga, did you talk to me about the CSO UPR process in how it works, or you just get me through it before you get out of studios?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jagenda. So what we do, we are the lead coordinator as a national coalition.
National coalition.
We coordinate in terms of, we bring together all these civil society actors.
How many are these?
We are talking about 23 clusters.
23.
Different clusters. Working on different thematic areas. Okay. Women's rights, environmental rights, civil political rights, socio-economic rights, the right to health, the right to education, all of them. So we bring them together to assess how far has our country or our government fulfilled its human rights obligations on women's rights, on civil and political rights, on the right to health, on the right to education, right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of all these civil clusters. So we bring them together and they compile their reports. And those reports, we do it in conjunction with the government. As I told you, this is a state-driven process. So the data, the information you relay out there must be reliable and accurate. So we have to consult as much as possible the different government entities that have official statistics, and then we look at see how we can share these reports, and then we provide it. Now, the whole objective, as I told you earlier, is to see how we can improve on the human rights situation in the country. So basically what we do is that we lay the facts on the ground. This is what we've done something, we acknowledge it, but a lot needs to be done, as my sister Susan was indicating.
Okay. Mr. Nsubuga, what recommendations will you give to government in as far as this whole process is concerned before you get out of studios?
The first recommendation is what they call the Witness Protection Bill being enacted into law.
Okay.
Let me explain this.
Talk about that, because we have the
further.
whistleblowers, but the witness protection,
yes,
witness protection, I think, is also very important.
Yes, because what happens is that, for example, we treat and rehabilitate survivors of torture. So after treating and rehabilitating, we want to take it further so that they access justice, so that perpetrators of torture are punished. But there is fear. They tell you that, will you protect me? So that this witness protection law will help these people to go on the witness stand and they
before the witness protection law, what do we have in the interim? There's something, I think, with the DPP. Witness something.
That is, I think, now institutional, but it's not. I mean, it's what can I say? It's when you have a law in place, at least it's more
and how
more
feasible,
tangible.
How feasible, Mr. Nsubuga, would that be? Because if I tortured Mr. Chirenga here, you treat him, he's a victim, and you want to take it further, and there is a law to actually protect him as a witness, and it comes back to me, why don't you think that I actually know that I am being prosecuted because of what I did to Chirenga? How feasible is it that when there is a protection law, Mr. Chirenga Uganda Semakola will come out to actually say, I can now witness, yet you very well know that the issue for which you're being persecuted, or prosecuted rather, is because of the things that I did to X, or Y, or Z.
Of course, you need to kind of explain to the witness that there is now you will be protected by the state. I mean, the state is the one who is going to protect you. Of course, now you have to kind of create awareness that so that the person also trusts the state will protect them. But I think it will be a step in the right direction, having this law in place, because there are so many cases where we would think the perpetrator would be punished, but the person goes off scot-free, and they
on that particular one, when you talk about punishing the perpetrators, like we said, in most cases, we look at the enforcers, we look at those in the forces, in the police, in the military, and elsewhere. Do we take on an individual, or we blame them for institutional problems?
Okay, as an individual. The law, it's as an individual.
Okay, so it has to be as an individual, as a fund X or Y or Z, not the institution.
Yeah, that's what even the law says.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, there is even a provision which I think started 2 financial years ago, where the individuals actually are even they are even forced to compensate if they are found guilty of torturing somebody. Yeah. So now that is one recommendation. Another one is what they call the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. This will allow other organizations, in addition to the Uganda Human Rights Commission, to monitor detention centers. Because now it's only the Uganda Human Rights Commission which is allowed to go to all these detention centers. If SCTV, we have permission to go to prisons, we are I mean, it's only prisons we can go to, but we can't go to the barracks. So it would help to mitigate when they know that an organization is going to keep monitoring. It would help in mitigating torture occurrences. Then, of course, implementation, because the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act is not really being implemented. As I mentioned, that we have not yet got these perpetrators of torture punished, so that they serve as an example. There is also the Human Rights Enforcement Act, which was also passed in 2019, which also gives those who violate human rights individually liable. So implementation of those two laws would really the recommendations, the major recommendations from the civil and political rights cluster, which would like to be taken up this time around. Yes.
Okay. Susan, any specific or particular recommendations that you would also have to put before government?
One of them for me would be on the question of legal reform. The women's movement grapples with society's appreciation for promoting women's rights, and it tends to stretch into the national and the subnational legislators. There is a need for governments, both local and national, to appreciate women's rights and ensure that laws can also actually speak to the protection of women. Right now, we are starting the review process for the sexual offences bill because it has been returned by the president. If you walked into any police station and asked about cases related to sexual offences, most of the complainants are female. Yes, there is a big problem in this country related to pushing for women's rights. So we need government to understand that promoting women's rights is not a problem. Now, legal reform is one thing. It is another thing to enforce and implement these laws. If we do not have resources to build a human resource, we do not have infrastructure for some of these laws to be enforced, then we continue to work in it's just a futile venture. The other recommendation for me would be for the government to put in place social protection, substantive social protection measures for the average woman across the country. You and me would possibly manage, but the average woman, say in my district in Serere, at a certain point will have nothing to fall back to. We need care-related infrastructure, which is which has very minimal stress on their resources, on their pockets. We also need more wealth creation programs for women, which take into account the unique challenges that women have accessing credit, accessing capital, the issues of decision-making and control.
For financial inclusion?
Yes, for financial inclusion. Okay. That is very important.
Mr. Chirenga, finally from you in just 1.5 minutes, is there political will in all these things that we're doing, but because you seem to be working very closely with the state actors?
Yes, there is political will, because the mere fact that we have an environment in which to discuss these things, and the fact that government has committed itself in the process. We've worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other actors. But of course, a lot needs to be done, especially on the ground. Because the Universal Periodic Review is one of the mechanisms in which we can realize the Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030. Now, the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable, are about your rights, your human being as a welfare. It's about the welfare of the human being. So I would urge all citizens to embrace this process, try to learn it, because it's all about the human being and his welfare.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me in studios this morning. Thanking you so much, Mr. Robert Chirenga, the Executive Director of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders of Uganda. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Mr. Samuel Nsubuga Herbert from the Africa Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. Karibu sana. And of course, thank you so much, my sister, Susan Acheng from UONET. And thanking GIZ also for this discussion this morning on UBC TV on Good Morning Uganda Extra. Thank you so much. My name is Jagenda Semakula, wishing all the best for God and my country as we continue inspiring Uganda. Stay blessed. Good morning. Thank you very much.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala.